For decades, Paul McCartney's public image has been one of charm, wit, and undeniable musical genius. To the world, he's the cheerful Beatle, the eternal optimist who could turn heartbreak into harmony and tragedy into timeless art. But behind that genial smile lies a story far darker than the glossy nostalgia of Beatlemania. Paul McCartney spent much of his life concealing a secret, his intense dislike, even hatred, for one woman who became entangled with the Beatles' legacy in ways no one could have predicted. For years, he played the role of diplomat, biting his tongue, letting the world speculate. But deep down, Paul's resentment grew stronger until he finally revealed the truth. So, who was this woman who shook the foundations of Paul's world? And why did he despise her more than anyone else? The answer isn't as simple as a love affair gone wrong. This story is about family, betrayal, broken friendships, and the destruction of something greater than music. The bond of brotherhood within the most famous band in history. Let's unravel the saga, from Paul's beginnings as a boy in Liverpool to the dizzying heights of Beatlemania, the heartbreak of their breakup, and the woman at the center of his bitterness. This isn't just a biography of Paul McCartney. It's a story of love, hate, and the heavy cost of genius. Paul McCartney's story begins in Liverpool, England, on June 18, 1942. He was born during the chaos of World War II, a child of working-class parents who knew both hardship and hope. His mother, Mary, was a midwife, steady and nurturing. His father, Jim, was a jazz musician who instilled in Paul an early appreciation for melody. Tragedy struck when Paul was just 14. Mary died of breast cancer, leaving behind a devastated family. Paul, crushed by the loss, found comfort in the piano his father encouraged him to play. That grief became the soil from which his songwriting blossomed. Later, he would confess that much of his music, especially the tender ballads, carried echoes of his mother. Songs like Let It Be weren't just art, they were conversations with the past. Paul's early life wasn't glamorous. He biked through Liverpool streets, strummed his first guitar awkwardly, and practiced endlessly. By his teens, he had discovered not only a love for music, but also a remarkable gift for melody and harmony. That gift would change his destiny the day he met another young dreamer, John Lennon. In 1957, Paul joined John's skiffle group, the Quarrymen. They bonded instantly, trading chords and lyrical ideas. Paul had the technical skills, John had the raw edge. Together, they began shaping songs that transcended teenage dreams. Soon, George Harrison, the quiet, younger guitarist, joined them. Later, Ringo Starr, the steady drummer, completed the lineup. The Beatles were born. But success didn't come overnight. The group cut their teeth in Hamburg, Germany, performing in gritty clubs until dawn. Those nights were long, the pay was meager, but the music was electric. By the early 1960s, they had perfected their craft. Back in Liverpool, their popularity surged. Soon after, in 1962, Brian Epstein, a refined, ambitious young man, became their manager. Epstein polished their image and secured a record deal. And then, in 1964, everything changed. The Beatles appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. Overnight, Beatlemania consumed the world. Beatlemania, tensions, and the woman who changed everything. By the mid-1960s, the Beatles weren't just a band. They were a global phenomenon. Paul emerged as the cute Beatle, charming audiences with his boyish looks and sweet vocals. Yet behind the scenes, the dynamic between the four members was shifting. Paul and John, once inseparable songwriting partners, began to drift apart. The early camaraderie gave way to creative tension. John wanted to push boundaries with raw, experimental music, while Paul favored melodic structure and polish. Each believed their vision should guide the band. Though the competition fueled brilliance, it also sowed seeds of resentment. Then, in 1966, the Beatles quit touring. Exhausted by screaming fans and endless travel, they retreated to the studio. Here, their genius soared, producing revolutionary albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Yet this new era also magnified their divisions. Enter Yoko Ono. In 1966, John Lennon met Yoko, a Japanese avant-garde artist. At first, she seemed an outsider to the Beatles' world, but quickly, her constant presence in the studio began to disrupt the fragile balance. Paul, George, and Ringo were frustrated. For years, the band had operated as a tight unit, with outside partners and spouses kept away from recording sessions. Yoko's arrival broke that unspoken rule. Paul, in particular, felt the impact. He had always seen the Beatles as his family, the only thing anchoring him after the loss of his mother. Now, that family was splintering before his eyes. He felt Yoko's influence pulled John further away, leaving Paul abandoned in the creative partnership that had defined his life. The resentment grew. Paul never attacked Yoko publicly at first, but privately, he was furious. He believed she manipulated John, isolating him from the rest of the band. Arguments in the studio became routine. The tension was palpable. Meanwhile, another battle brewed: the band's finances. Their manager, Brian Epstein, had died in 1967. Without his steady hand, the Beatles floundered. Into the chaos stepped Alan Klein, a shrewd businessman who offered to handle their affairs. John, George, and Ringo embraced him. Paul resisted. He preferred his new in-laws, the Eastmans, to manage their fortune. This disagreement turned into a war. The Beatles, once united, now faced bitter division. Recording sessions for Let It Be were miserable. Cameras captured the tension. Silent glares, passive-aggressive comments, and endless arguments. Paul tried to hold the group together, but even he could feel it slipping away. By 1970, it was over. Paul announced his departure, officially ending the Beatles. Fans around the world were devastated, but no one was more heartbroken than Paul himself. The dream he built since childhood was gone, and in his eyes, one person had helped destroy it: Yoko Ono. Breakups, betrayals, and reinvention. The Beatles' breakup was not a clean cut. It was a brutal unraveling. Lawsuits flew as Paul fought to dissolve their business partnership. He even took his bandmates to court, an unthinkable betrayal for men who once swore brotherhood. Yet Paul insisted it was necessary to protect their music and finances from Klein's influence. The legal battles cemented the bitterness. John and Paul's friendship, once the greatest partnership in rock history, collapsed. John lashed out in interviews, penning songs that mocked Paul. Paul retaliated with his own subtle jabs. The world watched as the two men who created Yesterday and Hey Jude turned their pens into weapons against each other. Paul also faced personal struggles. His attempts at solo work were initially dismissed as lightweight compared to John's raw political music. But Paul persevered, forming wings with his wife, Linda. Together, they created hits like Band on the Run and Live and Let Die, proving Paul was more than just a Beatle. Still, the shadow of Yoko lingered. Whenever the Beatles' breakup was discussed, her name always surfaced, and Paul's bitterness resurfaced too. Yet life moved forward. Paul built a family with Linda, though tragedy struck again when she died of cancer in 1998. Paul was shattered, but leaned on his children and his music to endure. His later years brought fresh battles, including a bitter divorce from Heather Mills that cost him millions. And yet, through all this turmoil, Paul remained a survivor. He outlasted critics, endured scandal, and continued to perform before sold-out stadiums well into his 70s. And what about the woman he despised? For decades, Paul avoided direct attacks on Yoko. But in interviews later in life, he finally admitted the truth. He never forgave her for what he believed she did to the Beatles. He confessed that her constant presence, her influence over John, and the wedge she drove between the band left scars that never fully healed. Even so, Paul has also shown moments of grace. He acknowledged John's love for Yoko and eventually performed with her son, Sean. But deep down, the resentment lingers. In Paul's eyes, she wasn't just John's partner. She was the force that pulled apart the greatest band in history.
Paul McCartney's story is one of brilliance shadowed by bitterness. From his tragic childhood to the heights of global fame, from brotherhood to betrayal, his life has been shaped by both love and hate. His music continues to inspire generations, yet behind every melody lies the memory of what was lost. The Beatles gave the world more than songs. They gave us a cultural revolution. But their downfall reminds us that even the greatest legacies can be undone by conflict, ego, and resentment. And for Paul, the name Yoko Ono will forever be etched in his memory, not as a muse, but as the woman he truly hated more than anything.